Bell.
Yo.
Microphone. Commissioner Briscoe's here.
Your microphone's off.
How's it working better now? Okay. I'd like to do the advisory committee meeting schedules. First thing I'd like to note for people is that the TAC and the BIAC, the Technical Airport Advisory Committee meeting, and the Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee meeting for November has been canceled. The meetings for the TAC in January are Thursday, January 16th, 2019 at 9:30 a.m. at the ARF Conference Room, 2005 West Bakerview Road, Bellingham International Airport. And the BIAC, Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee, is Thursday, January 16th at 5 p.m. in the ARF Conference Room at 2005 West Bakerview Road, Bellingham International Airport. The Marine Advisory Committee, MAC, is Tuesday, November 12th at 2019 at 6 p.m. at the Commission Chambers here in the Harbor Center Building, 1801 Roeder Avenue, Bellingham. So with that, I'd like to move to public comment, and Ken Hertz, please. Yes, that'd be fine, Ken.
Okay, here. Well, thank you very much. I'm interested in Commissioner Bell's proposal.
Could you,
the last-
your name and address, Ken,
Oh, I'm
please, for the
sorry.
record?
Ken Hertz, 811 10th Street.
Thank you.
kkhertz@mac.com. Anyway, I'm here to bring up the thought of the 5 commissioners. And since I only have 3 minutes, I jotted my comments down. Us old guys tend to ramble. But as you may or may not know, a few years back, the 5 commissioner proposal was brought up. And I think it was brought up primarily because of some disgruntled fishermen, Bobby, at the time. You don't know about those guys, huh? But anyway, they were standing up here and they were complaining about the commission, and for what various reason, that's up to them. But the point is that the idea of 5 commissioners was brought up, and we rallied a group of people to get together to try to bring together a group that would support the idea of 5 commissioners. We had the commission at that time, the 3 commissioners, totally opposed to it. They were opposed to it, but we went out and attempted to sell it as well. In fact, the commissioners, one particular commissioner at that time, was at every rally or every forum that I was at. I was supporting the idea, and he was opposing it. So it was very difficult to sell a concept of 5 commissioners when the 3 commissioners were opposed to it. Now, not all 3, and I don't think at that time, but they sure weren't for it. So my belief is that unless the commission unanimously supports 5 commissioners, it's going to be a very, very difficult sell. You need to unanimously support it if you think it's a good idea. I believe it's a good idea. Firstly, because the port has become far more complex, and I've talked to the folks at Anacortes and Everett. By the way, I think Everett has one of the finest port operations that I've seen. They've done a terrific job. But each of those ports have 5 commissioners. The difference is that they're citywide. They don't have a county-wide district. And when we have a county-wide district like we have here, you need that additional representation. It just makes a lot of sense. And what I've been talking to some of the folks about is that we would maybe be up to the commission to have the same districts or wards that the county council has. And basically gives 2 from the city and 3 from the county. Now, I've had some feedback on that, pros and cons. Some think you're going to get too many liberals. Some think you're going to get too many conservatives. It went on and on and on. But that's the pitch. Would be basically following the county council wards. Trying to get a handle on this, I did put together a petition, and people don't have enough time to run around getting signatures on a petition when they don't know whether or not it's going to materialize. I asked Gary Tomsick, former city manager of Blaine, who in turn asked David Welbrett, former city manager of Blaine, Charles Hopkin, former mayor of Blaine, and 29 others did sign a petition. He's retired, so he had the time to run around and get these petitions signed. In Linden, I asked Bob Leibolt, Steve Price, Chuck Robinson, Jack Laus. They all think it's a good idea. I've asked Steve Bren and Jim Swift, both in Bellingham. I have a great deal of respect for these people. That's the reason I went out and asked them about it. David Blair, I talked to David about it. He wasn't too pumped about it, but he wasn't sure what his answer might be. And I asked Ted Mishaikoff to get his feelers out. He did attend, by the way, Bobby, one of your fundraisers, I think, and he didn't get a great reaction from your people. But I think the thing that they have to remember, as you have to remember, as we all have to remember, today we're satisfied. How about tomorrow? How about tomorrow when things change? It's a huge difference. And all of a sudden, like in the past, we had one commissioner or two commissioners that were totally a problem. My personal experience I've worked with 3 commissioners, I've worked with 5 commissioners, I've worked with 7 council members, and I've worked with 9, being an old guy and being involved in all that stuff. I found 3 commissioners a problem. Why? Too much middling with the staff. Now, I don't know whether your staff has that problem. I had the problem. That's 33% of the people. One person creates a problem with the staff, and it's very, very difficult to get around that. 5 commissioners, different, or 5 board members, different. 7 council members is getting a little bit out of hand, but even 9 in Portland, for example, they have now 11, but it gets to be totally ridiculous. I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that if you have a more solid policy body like 5 commissioners or 7 commissioners, 5 I think is, if you look at the history of policy-making bodies, the Chinese did a study years ago and said this is the ultimate, would be 5 particular members of a policy body is the best system. I look up there, I see 5 commissioners, so at least there's 5 seats. I certainly hope that you'll take this under consideration, and if there's a lot of support for it, we'll go out. I know there's a number of people in the community, and we'll try to sell the concept, but it's going to have to start here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Dick Cathell, is that?
Looks like Cat Hill, I know, but it's pronounced Cathell.
Yeah, Cathell, okay.
And a boater here in Bellingham for over 20 years, and a
Could you give us
member.
your name and address, please,
I'm Dick Cathell, 3684 South Pebble Place, Bellingham, 98226.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I've been a member on MAC for a couple of 3 years now, and I've been very involved in the boating community. I also have started a company in my retirement as a hospital chaplain in retirement, where we do burnout prevention for healthcare chaplains across the state. And so I bring in chaplains from all around the state and do workshops and burnout prevention and cruises. We do those on cruises, and so. I've also been involved with the National Pastoral Care Organizations, with the Association of Professional Chaplains, the largest pastoral care organization in the world, sat on their board for many years. And I've been on many other committees and councils and boards. And my point is that when I moved here into Bellingham, it was one thing when we were a 60-some thousand city and we were about 120, 140,000 in the county. But now we've grown and we've become larger and larger. And as was just mentioned, there's 5 districts that we have. It would seem to me to have representation from each of those districts. And I, as I have on other boards and committees, I've always been a believer that we should help, we should help grow our governing councils in terms of balance, whether it be gender or color. I think that's important as well. I think that the reason that I'm motivated for this is because several months ago, I was reading in the paper that there was a vote of our commissioners, and only 2 out of 3 commissioners voted to move ahead with the granary project. And yet we'd been working on that for years. And so when 1/3 is showing up, it creates, anyway, it does not create community. It does not create unity or community. So I think as we move along and there's more and more criticism of leaders just in general across the nation, it would seem to me to have a broader representation when you're representing 2 decisions on millions and millions of dollars. Now, I know that this commission, y'all get along really well from an outside perspective. And I love what's going on. I love how you're moving together. And I really don't want to see that camaraderie broken. So I'm not on a desire for change for that reason. My desire is just as we move into the future, as was mentioned, I think we need to have that broader representation to protect each of you in ways so that you're not accused of just having the old cronies making all the decisions in Bellingham, which I've heard for years and years of the past. And so I'm just seconding the motion of the previous speaker and saying I believe we should move ahead with a representation of 5 commissioners to represent us more adequately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who are you calling an old crony?
I'm going to start dyeing my hair, I
No, that
guess.
was a bit of past somewhere, way in the past.
I'm going to need one of those cruises if you keep that up.
Pete Granger.
Pete Granger, 4716 Fir Tree Way, Bellingham. I'm not going to speak to this previous subject today, but just a brief comment on your the comprehensive plan preliminary strategic budget update. With the Working Waterfront Coalition, we're very pleased to see in your real estate objectives, both on page 53, both number 3 and 4, that address maximizing marine trades occupancy and expanding marine trades properties. So I just wanted to thank you for that. Hope it moves forward, and we'll be certainly working with you on that. So thanks.
Thank you, Pete. So is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak that did not sign up?
Paul Schisler, 1010 C Street, Bellingham. I just wanted to also speak in favor of your consideration of expanding the commission from 3 to 5 for the good reasons that Ken Hertz has already mentioned and for other good reasons. Maybe you can move forward with that this evening. There may be some questions left to resolve between now and your next meeting, like should it be 2 at large or 5 districts? But in any case, you can resolve those hopefully soon so that this could go to the voters in 2020, ideally early in 2020, so we can move forward and add to the brain power we have up there already with 2 more people to help make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else wishing to speak that did not sign up? Okay, with that, I'd like to mention a email letter that we received from Alan McConchie. I would like it duly noted that all 3 commissioners have received this, and thank you for sending in that testimony. With that, we're going to move on to, I'll give this back to Carrie. We're going to move on to our consent agenda.
A motion to approve the consent agenda items A through D.
Commissioner Shepard, anything to pull out of there to discussing?
No,
Commissioner Bell?
nothing for me.
I have nothing either. So,
A motion to approve the consent agenda items A through D.
Commissioner Bell.
Aye.
Commissioner Shepard. Aye. Commissioner Briscoe's aye as well. Carries 3-0. With that, I guess we'll move on to our first presentation, which is the Corks District Energy Update. Mr. Hogan.
Good evening, Commissioners. Mike Hogan, Public Affairs Administrator. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Ivana Safar from Corks Utilities. She's going to give an update on our efforts to implement a district energy system in the waterfront district. Sustainability and sustainable energy solutions in particular have been an important part of the planning for the waterfront since the port acquired the site in January 2005. In 2013, the Port and City approved master planning documents which say that if district energy is available, new developments shall connect to the system. And then in 2014, the city published a waterfront utilities master plan, which took a first look at what a district energy system might look like, as well as microhydro and district water and district stormwater. In November of 2017, the Port Commission authorized the installation of a 4-pipe system underneath the roads that were to be constructed. And this was really a forward-thinking decision. The problem with these systems is that, it takes a while for you to recover the investment. But looking at the values of the community and what we wanted this development to look like to be different than other standard developments, that was a milestone moment. In December of 2018, the port signed a MOU with Corks Utilities on a district energy implementation strategy to look at the conceptual design, screen renewable energy technologies, do detailed technical and financial due diligence, and also look at ownership models for the waterfront district. Ivana is going to give an update on their efforts to date, and then we anticipate with the Port Commission's continued support that we would be back in February with business agreements with Corks for your approval. So with that, I will introduce Ivana.
Thank you. Good evening. Ivana Safar from Corks. It's almost a year I have been here to talk about our MOU and the process move this project forward. And I also tonight have with me my colleagues Travis Kulak, he's president of our energy services, and Charlene Rowan, she is a project manager and will be leading this project, hopefully moving forward. So it's a pleasure to be here because we have done quite a bit of work over the last 11 months or so. So we would like to update quickly about what was the process during the feasibility/due diligence assessment, what are the results, key business and financial terms that were taken into consideration and would be brought into the negotiations of the agreement, comparison of business as usual scenario, that would be if the district energy is not implemented in the development compared to district energy. Talk a little bit about the benefits of district energy and particular solution for the downtown area, and talk about roles and responsibilities of different parties and next steps and a timeline. I want to keep it brief, so we just go very quickly through this, and please, any questions at the end of the presentation or during. So our process involve technical assessment and then financial due diligence or a feasibility study. During that technical assessment, what we have done, we worked with the developer to identify the timeline for the development of the area and the buildings, how they would develop, what those buildings would look like, commercial and residential, and we identify what would be required energy load and energy consumption requirements for the area. So that's basically the basis to start assessing any of the technologies and opportunities for the area. After doing that, we also worked with the subconsultants, engineers, and we worked on a screening on different technology options for implementation. And if you may remember from those several months ago, we were talking about implementing project in stages. So have a temporary or interim solution based on natural gas and then build it up as the development progresses. And this really eliminates the risks of potential stranded capital if development doesn't develop in the timelines as expected. And so that was all evaluated during this and took into consideration when selecting the technology and the best approach. We were looking at heating and cooling and all cooling options and came up with the distribution piping layout, considering that there is already pipeline or 4 pipes actually in the ground on Laurel Street. After the technical due diligence, that was the basis for us to start working on a financial assessments that basically covers the capital cost estimates, or operation and maintenance estimate for the proposed solution, use of commodities, so natural gas and electricity, and optimization of the phasing, technologies, and all that comes into that evaluation, and we came up or developed the final financial model. Financial model is actually based on cost of service, that is typical utility model, and it's used to develop the cost for the customer. So the results of our assessment, we proved that the heating service is going to be provided to each of the buildings and through the 4-pipe system, so it would be separate cooling and heating system. So if you look at the map, the red color is the heating pipe and blue is the cooling pipe. So cooling service, because there is interest from a developer to include cooling in some of the residential buildings, and of course it's required for all like office and commercial spaces, it's proven to be part of the project, although for residential buildings it will be selective based on the requirements of the developer. We understand that the first buildings that are coming on the waterfront will include cooling. Some other residential areas may not require or include cooling, but all commercial and office buildings will be cooled as well. So it would be both services, cooling and heating for the development. We evaluated various alternative energy solutions, including waste heat recovery from EncoGen, sewer heat recovery from city sewer pipelines. We did quick evaluation of the smaller biomass, like wood waste, wood chips plant, and just heat pumps, so basically hybrid heat pumps technology. Based on evaluation, and as mentioned before, that interim solution is really a key to develop this project on a greenfield like approach, because we try to meet the capital spend with the development of the area. So interim solution would be natural gas based, and then that permanent solution, green energy, would come online based on our current information approximately in 2029. And this can, of course, change depending on the timelines for the development. It can be speed up or it can be longer development. So it's a very flexible solution when that would be implemented. And also depends, there could be grants that can help the capital, and the solution could be implemented faster and earlier. During our next couple of months to work on this, there will be optimization of the scenarios that we are going to implement, but it doesn't preclude us to doing optimization as we are moving forward with the project, and even if we are serving first customers. So that will be continuously done during the project.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning the cooling. Could you just go over that one more time for me? You said that the commercial buildings would all be serviced by heating and cooling. And then the residential, some would be cooled using the district energy. And was it some would not be cooled with district energy? or some would just not be cooled?
Some would just not be cooled. And that's based on our initial discussion with the developer, that they said that it may not be required. In this climate, it's not necessarily always needed for residential buildings. People prefer to open windows than to use cooling. So that's why it's, and it's still open option, because those buildings that are potentially not going to be cooled are in the later stages of development. So, our temperatures are changing every year, so it may be actually required by the time they come online, or people will require that or request that. It will be really potentially market-driven, as well as it could be, requirement or need.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So in terms of the some of the key terms that we took into consideration and discussing the term sheets with the port team, this utility would be owned by Corix. It's in Washington State, thermal energy is not regulated by the regulator, but we would propose to have like independent commission that would be dealing with capital expansions, any rate setting, and any updates to the rates, so that there is independent third-party review of the process and long-term operation of the utility. As mentioned before, it would be developed in phases, really matching the capital to the expansion of the development area. And we are looking at flexible approach in our financial modeling. That means smoothing the rates and other tools to make the rates and the cost to the customers affordable, not chunky when the capital is spent. So basically just to keep it all smooth. To give a very quick update on or information about what was taken into consideration from financial perspective as the assumption. So it's 30-year financial model. We used 60/40 debt equity ratio, approximately 4.7% debt rate, 10% on equity rate, and tax rate 21%. These are all assumptions at this time. Of course, it will be subject to negotiations and actual, debt rate, for example, when we close the project. Escalation on 2% on most of the commodities and the costs. Other than labor, we use 3%, and on external contracts, 5%, based on the kind of market conditions. So all these things put together and in a nice spreadsheets and financial model, we came with some cost for the business, for the district energy system. We also evaluate business as usual scenario. Business as usual means there is no district energy in the area, and each building would have their own boilers and chillers for cooling. In that business as usual scenario, we include capital cost, what it would mean for the building to operate those systems, build a reserve fund for future replacements, and of course commodity costs. So it's really all in cost, so that it's apples to apples comparison to district energy, because district energy, when you build new, again, it includes everything from capital, O&M costs, and commodities. So these two are compared together. As mentioned, the use scenario is all in as well. And then we compare the net present value for both scenarios. What would be the rate or cost per, we used megawatt hour here, but promise that we will change it to proper rates. And net present value of the of the revenue requirement. So revenue requirement is basically result of the cost of service. That means what is the cost of capital, O&M, commodities, cost of debt and equity, and what do I need to charge customers to recover all those costs. So that's a revenue requirement. So this is just for comparison. We don't necessarily want everybody to think like this is the result. We just want to show that the district energy proved to be better than business as usual scenario. And this assessment, these initial rates would be for natural gas-based system. As we move forward, of course, everything will be fine-tuned. We haven't done detailed design and the costing, so all that will be part of the next step when we get to more preliminary design. In terms of the benefits, even with what we have done today, then compare the natural gas-based interim solution to the business as usual, there are benefits and proven benefits, not only on district energy, but also for this particular area. So it's a flexible solution. This means we start smaller with the natural gas, and we have opportunities to incorporate potential any technologies as it becomes available. We have evaluated sewer heat recovery as very well fit technology for this project, as well as Encogen waste heat recovery. Other technologies could come in 5 years. It's opportunity to incorporate it. That's why that flexibility to develop it over time and not invest in particular technology at the beginning of the project. Increased efficiencies. Compared to business as usual, we can actually design and operate the system so that it provides more efficiencies than just standalone building-based system. It's from sizing of the equipment and sizing and designing it properly with the growth of the system. Reduce carbon footprint. We did a very quick assessment just on that natural gas-based district energy system, that interim solution with the business as usual, and it proves to be approximately 5% savings just from that, not implementing renewable energy source. It's not maybe too much of the savings, but also we see that carbon intensities for electricity in the region is way higher than anywhere else. So like if you would compare the same project maybe in some other areas, it would show slightly higher reductions. Then building savings, we are building one plant instead of several plants in each building, so it's really maximizing the use of the space and benefits. Future growth opportunity, once it's established as the bone kind of district energy, there could be opportunity to expand to different areas and serve other customers that would eventually benefit the core customer group as well. Because more customers are on the system, it's always better to the final cost to the customers are lower. And then simplicity. All the requirements, costs associated with operating individual building heating and cooling systems are now transferred on the utility. So building owners and homeowners associations do not have that responsibility and task to deal with those systems. In terms of the roles and responsibilities, the key parties that we identified, there will be a lot more stakeholders, but we just wanted to highlight the key parties. So Corix would be responsible for designing, building, financing, operating, and expanding the system, and taking care of the asset management and renewal. Port of Bellingham is a landowner, creator of master development plan, owns the land and sells to the developer once the particular parcel development is approved. We would also have infrastructure agreement between the parties, so Corix and Port would sign the infrastructure agreement. The key party to this, of course, is Hardcore Developments. They are developing all the parcels, so it's very simplified the kind of process to have one party to negotiate. And Corix will have a thermal energy services agreement with the developer. And then City of Bellingham, utility assessment, easements in municipal right-of-ways. We will need to have those agreements with the city for the pipe and access to the pipe, as well as potential for sewer heat recovery. There would need to be agreement with the city. And this is the last one, the next steps, and what we expect to happen in several months to come. We believe and hope that everybody will agree to move forward to fine-tune the project and really work on optimization, but at the same time work on the agreements between the parties. So Port and Corix would work on the infrastructure agreement, and we would also engage with the developer with the thermal energy service agreement. And based on timelines and discussions with the developer, really start with the design and construction mid-year 2020, and I believe occupancy of that first building is expected sometimes in Q3 2021. So we would definitely want to be ready if all the agreements are signed and everybody approves the project. Important to mention, as Mike already mentioned it, that we would come back to the commission for approvals of the agreements and any arrangements between the parties approximately in February next year. Thank you.
Commissioner Bell, any questions? Commissioner Shepherd?
Yeah, a couple questions. You talked a lot about working with the developer. Have you gotten enough information from the developer to make the plans you need? Have you gotten enough responsiveness and everything else?
It's kind of harder with the time difference, but we've been in contact and several times throughout the process, and we actually updated the development schedule quite recently, a few months back, based on their feedback. Although we understand that there is not really set in stone development past several first buildings, we agreed on a couple of assumptions for the development. You know, it's going to be gold, LEED gold, and what are approximately like standards for development, but also the timelines. They hired the mechanical contractor for first building, so we are in contact with them, and now basically regularly, every 2 or 3 weeks, the meetings will be happening on the regular basis. So now after the assessment, really the work will start, and we will be in contact with them more often than it was before. But initially, we got information what we needed, and we believe that it's initial and very conceptual at the time, but it helped definitely to put the project together.
Okay. Tell us about any conversations with Puget Sound Energy and use of the waste heat from the EcoGen plant.
Yeah. So we had initial discussions. We toured the plant, and got a better understanding of the operating schedule of the plant. And our understanding from the initial when we started to work and the waste heat was really like number one renewable energy, we learned that they are also working more like a peaking facility and don't work all the time, and especially in the winter when the heat is most required. So discussion will continue, and we believe that there is an opportunity and a combination of potentially sewer heat recovery that is available all the time, and EcoGen heat would be a good fit because you are using heat pumps to extract that energy. So whether it's coming that waste heat from EcoGen or sewer heat recovery, it would basically be interchangeable, I would say. So we definitely are interested to do that. We had experience to come in the summer and see the steam from the cooling tower. So there is definitely opportunity to use that waste heat, and we would like to continue talking with them. Nothing official or signed was done, but definitely initial discussions were completed.
Okay, great. And I saw on the first map, you had the Millworks project identified as one of the potential recipients of the heating and cooling. And
Yeah.
so it sounds like you've been in contact with that,
Correct. Yeah.
that group as well.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, please let us know if there's anything that you need as part of the agreements that we have with the developer to make this process more, work well, be successful, and really deliver the both the energy efficiency and the savings that it can do, and we've been expecting. So, thank you.
We will do. Thanks.
I have a question. The switch you spoke to in roughly 2029 to basically green renewable. Do you have any idea of the cost of that from what we'll be putting in to change over?
Of course, it depends what final technology and the size of the facility will be. With current assumptions, I think we assumed just technology approximately $3 million. And I think building was approximately another 2, I think. About that. Yeah.
I didn't
So,
hear.
another, like the building for the final solution and the technology altogether would be approximately $5 million.
Okay. Thank you. I know it's a rough guess.
Yeah,
because we're
it's
talking about way
very,
in the
very
future.
high level at this point, and if it wouldn't be that technology, we would still need to build a permanent solution, whether it's natural gas or so. So it would be not, like $5 million over what we already have. It would be slightly less if you offset it with the other technology or natural gas boilers.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming down. Thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Bell, do you have anything?
No.
Thank you, Commissioners. And a final note, just thank you to the many community members who, ever since we acquired the property have wanted this development to go above and beyond and be something better, to groups like Sustainable Connections that have organized tours to see other district energy solutions, and to the staff at the city and the Western Washington University and Puget Sound Energy for their time and continued support, and looking forward to being part of the final solution for renewable energy technologies.
I would ask that if you do run into roadblocks trying to get hold of people to work these things out, that you please get hold of Mike right away, or Director Fix, or one of the commissioners, so that we can help negotiate the roadblock, because we don't want these things slowed down because people aren't getting back to you with the information you need.
In that order, Mike, Rob.
Got it. Terrific. Thank you.
As a point of order, can I ask that, because we've got some people in the crowd that
Commissioner Bell, go ahead.
they're interested in the 3 to 5 update discussion and maybe not want to sit through the strategic budget update? Nothing personal.
It's only one
One slide? Really?
She already told me it's a mini slide, too.
No joke?
Huh? No joke. I don't like that part.
I tried to let you out early, wasn't a joke last time either.
Let's continue. I think we're okay. Let's continue
One slide.
with our agenda. Thank you.
Tamara Subject, Director of Finance. So we did go through the entire budget at our last meeting, so you'll be happy to hear we're not doing that again tonight. You're welcome. There was just one outstanding item, and that's the property tax levy. We skipped over that last time in order to have an opportunity for the public hearing. So what is in the published draft budget is the 0% increase. And I just wanted the commission to have an opportunity to discuss, give me direction. Do we want to increase the tax by 1%, which is allowed by law? In 2019, we levied about 7.3, a little over 7.3 million. I've added levy on new construction for 2020, but did not increase anything else. And so I wanted to ask the commission, is that what your desire is, or are you interested in increasing that tax base by 1%?
Commissioner Shepard.
I'm interested in keeping the tax rate the same that it is currently. If we were going to take the 1%, I would like us to really have a clearly identified project that had significant economic development potential for the county that we were going to be putting that towards. So we certainly have lots of things are on our unfunded list, but I think for my perspective, I think people feel a significant amount of tax burden already, and it would be my perspective to keep it where it is.
Commissioner Bell.
Ditto.
And I agree with my fellow commissioners. I think that, and I've always pretty much said since I've got here, we need to make this machine feed itself. We need to come up with more money through our investments as well as our shipping terminal and get it online and get it running. Chris, I know you're working on it. Thank you. But I agree with my fellow commissioners.
I heard a visible noise over here. Tell me what to do, I can do it.
No, it's a difficult job the port's trying to do. We've got $40 million of unfunded projects to deal with over the next few years. So this decision that's made here at this desk this evening is not is not made lightly. We know we need a lot of money. We know we have a lot of things to do, but we would, as you can see, we're in uniform decision. We don't want to go to the people's pocket until we absolutely have to. And I don't believe we're at that point yet. There may be people that disagree with me in the room, but I believe we can figure it out. We can do a better job than we are. But we are doing a good job, and thank you to staff for that. And thank you for doing what you do, because the numbers are sometimes mind-boggling. So thank you.
They
Deborah.
are. All right, thanks for the direction, and we will do that.
Okay, we've got expanding the commission from 3 to 5 update here.
So Commissioners, this last came up in 2012, I believe it was, as Ken Hertz alluded to earlier. I'm going to present to you the facts as we think we've uncovered them for the process, without any bias as to what we think should happen. The relevant RCW is 5312. We've read that several times, and we believe we've got it right now. There's 2 ways that this can get on the ballot. The only way to increase from 3 to 5 commissioners is by a vote of the people. It can't be done any other way. So I have heard rumor that the Port Commission can decide to make it 5 commission. That's not true. It must go on the ballot. And it can get on the ballot 2 ways. One is you put it on the ballot, and that is what happened in 2012. And the other way is a petition, and the petition is 10% of the number of voters that vote in the last general election. Being that today is a general election, we'd be looking at today's vote and coming up with a 10% number, which I believe is going to be somewhere around 5,000 or 6,000 people would be 10% of the vote, 50 to 60,000 voters. Again, we'll know that number in the next couple of days. After one of those 2 things happens, that you put it on the ballot or the petition puts it on the ballot, then it's submitted to the next general or special election, occurring 60 days after that petition occurs. So I'm going to have the dates for you in a later slide, but basically you have an election in February, you have one in April, those are special elections, you have a primary election in August, and you have a general election in November. And 60 days prior to those, whatever election that is that you elect to do this, it would be on that ballot.
So, Rob, when it says next, we're not required to do the next? That's a choice we get to make?
It'll automatically occur 60 days after you pass a resolution or after you're presented with a petition of 10% of the last voters. So, in other words, if you tonight say, hey, we want to do this, we're going to make a resolution, then staff will work to put that resolution forward to the county auditor by December 13th, I believe is the date for the February 11th election.
So the 60 days is a hard
Correct.
hard number.
As soon as you act, 60 days after that, it's going to, or more, depending on when the next election is scheduled, but no less than the 60 days. Does that make sense? Okay, then 2 additional port commissioners are elected at the next general election. So the commissioners, once you say it passes in February, then next November, the general election will be the time when 2 new commissioners are elected. If you decide to act on this next, say, September, and the 60-day runout would put this on the general election in November, then it would be the November following that 2 commissioners would be elected. So the commissioners can't be elected in a special election. They're only elected in a general election. So the default is 5 commissioner districts, and if this is put on the ballot, you could adopt your own districts. You could take the existing county 5 districts. They have to be substantially equal in population is your only requirement there. But the default, if it passes, would be 5 commissioner districts, and then at some point in the future, future action could put on the ballot to go to 2 at large. So you would keep 3 districts and go to 2 at large. But the default position for passing this would be 5 commissioner districts. The initial terms, if this passed in an even number year, would be the 2 new commissioners, the one who gets the most votes, would get a 3-year term. And the one who got the second most votes, or the lesser votes, would get a 1-year term. And this would put them back on an election cycle where every 4 years, at that point, we would have every two years, we'd have 3 commissioners up, and then 2 years after that, you'd have 2 commissioners up. Just like today, we have 2 up and then 1 up every 2 years. Is that clear? Then in future elections, everyone will be elected to 4-year terms. So that's a one-time only deal in that initial election. If this occurs in an odd number year, the largest vote getter would get a 4-year term, and the second largest vote getter would get a 2-year term. So we talked about that occurring 60 days or more after the petition was submitted or the resolution is adopted by the Port Commission. So here's your dates. We would have to have a petition submitted to the county by December 13th to make the February 11th election. So if you wanted to make that December 13th date, you could pass it tonight, you could pass it on November 19th, or you could pass it on December 10th, which is your next scheduled commission meetings. If you wanted it on the April special election, you would have to have it by February 28th to the county. And then if you wanted it for the August 4th primary, it would have to occur by May 8th. And if you wanted it for November 3rd, the general election, it would have to be, the resolution of the petition would have to be turned in by August 4th. Everyone with me? If the increase passes, then the vote to elect new commissioners would occur at the next general election. Again, I talked about that earlier. Pretty self-explanatory there. I've included a map of the 3 commissioner districts here. This is your districts today. It's the same map that the county used when they had 3 districts. The county now has 5 districts, and this is that map. So just for your information, those 2 maps. And then my last slide is regarding the costs. What this does not include is an election expense for the item itself. So this includes election expense for 2 more commissioners running every 4 years. But it's really hard to know, depending on what election it goes on, what the actual election for the ballot measure of going from 3 to 5 would cost. If that were to occur in a general election, it would be a lot less than if it occurs in a special election, because in a special election, you're dividing those election costs about a lot less parties. In fact, we rarely have an April special election. If you chose to do that date, there's a good chance that we're bearing 100% of the cost of that election with no one to share that with. It just depends on who else has election items in what districts.
So say that February would be shared. April would be more than likely.
And I don't know that there's anything in February now. Usually there's a February special election, there's a school bond measure or something like that goes out. So I'm just predicting that there's going to be something else in February. You could very well get stuck with the whole bill in February as well. And I think that's all for my slides. We came up with the 4-year cost. You can see that the 4-year cost, or for a 3 commission, for the past 4 years is about $250,000, and that the 4-year cost for 5 commissioners for the next 4 years is estimated to be about $344,000. So about $100,000 increase over 4 years, so $25,000 a year increase in actual cost to have 2 more commissioners. And again, that does not include the election for going from 3 to 5, but it does include the election costs of 2 commissioners.
Nor does it include a 1% increase in.
No, it clearly doesn't include a 1% increase in property taxes.
So I've got a timing.
Yes,
on your
sir.
timing question. As I did the math in my head, if we have a special election in February and we move forward, then we elect somebody in November. If we miss that deadline and we elect somebody in November, then we have to wait until 2021 to have the next election.
That's a great point, Commissioner, because in 2021, there's going to be 2 other seats up from the Port Commission for election.
Which
So
means you'd have 4
you're 4
seats.
out of 5 seats up in 2021.
Which means that the one remaining commissioner would be there with potentially 4 new guys.
That's correct. It could be a pretty big turnover in the Port Commission.
That's like a new sane crew. I'm used to that.
I would. Did not expect that. Yeah, so that would
Be a one-time occurrence, right? That'd be a one-time occurrence where you'd have 4 out of the 5 up, and after that, it would go back to your staggered, where every 4 years you'd have 3 up, and then 2 years later you would have 2 up.
And what's the cost? Is this $92,000 the total cost of putting a ballot measure on if we were to bear the 100% of that cost?
That's not the ballot measure from going from 3 to 5. That is the annual election expense of additional commissioners.
What would be the expense if we were responsible for 100% of the cost in a February election cycle, special election?
I don't know that. Again, it depends on how many other elections you have there. We tend to run about $100,000 per election, per ballot measure. But again, if you're the only one and the burden of the entire election is on you, it's going to be a lot more than $100,000. If you're sharing that with the school district and the PUD or a couple other different items on there, then you're probably back to a more reasonable number. We just don't know what's going to be on that February ballot at this time.
Do we know what a high-end number is on that?
I don't. I'll try and find out if you have to do the whole election, what that would cost. I'll find that out and get back to you, yeah.
That would be useful. Yeah, I'd like to know. I mean, if we're talking $500,000 or 200, I don't, it makes a calculation there.
I'll see if I can find that out for you. Do you? Tamara will find that out for you.
So are you through, are we at the end?
I'm done. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
So,
Just
Tamara, did you? Oh, I don't have it. Oh, you, okay, I'm sorry. Commissioner Bell.
Yeah, just because this is kind of how I roll. What if you did a 6-year term? I just thrown it out there as a,
John?
Go to 6-year term, I believe that's come back to
would that be another? Because that would spread the costs out. I think it would also spread the craziness out of an election year, right?
Yeah, I believe
Every 2
that.
years.
John's right. That's going to be addressed in 5312 as well, I believe, but it's going to have to go to a vote of the people to go to 6.
I'm not serious about that. I just.
And there are ports that have 6-year terms.
that, or what?
Well, it's just, you spread that cost out of elections over a greater period of time, and you also seriously don't have an election every 2 years. Because right now, every other year, we have an election.
So we can report back to you on 2 things. One is the cost if you have 100% of the burden of an election. Yeah, and what it takes to go to 6-year term, and what ports are on 6-year terms, because there's a couple that are on 6-year terms right now.
So I'm assuming we want to have some discussion on this. So Commissioner Shepherd, we'll let you start the discussion. How's that?
Sure. I want to thank everyone who's spoken previously. I thought everybody had some very good comments. I've talked to a number of different people on this issue. It's been something that continually gets brought up. And overwhelmingly, the people who talk to me about this are interested in seeing us move to a greater number of commissioners. And the harmonizing with the county councils, 5 districts, seems to make sense to a lot of people. I know when I talk to people and try and describe the difference between 3 districts and their geographic boundaries and the 5 districts that the county has and those geographic boundaries for 2 organizations that are county-wide and service the entire county, it's confusing. It's confusing enough for people to know what the port does to start with, and that just adds up another layer of complexity. So I think there are some kind of harmonization or just reducing the confusion rationale. And then both the speakers addressed, the importance of having greater accountability, having greater reach, having greater spread of the representation, both in terms of the diversity of our county, but also the diversity of who we can see up here. I did some of my own informal polling on this. I always enjoy, a good social scientist loves polling and data collection, and my own informal polling had a fairly good reach of over 2,000 people and was 75% in favor, which was surprising to me that it was so lopsided in its support for moving to the 5 commission model. I think we've got a little bit more homework to do in terms of the timing. I like that we're not, it's not a decision that has to be made immediately. We've got some time to figure out some of those other points, but it is something that I am supportive of.
Commissioner Bell?
I think it's good governance. I do believe that having the ability, and I think really what's started some of this was, as I'm walking around that Blaine Marina, I would have loved nothing more than to have been able to go there with you and have you and I have a discussion about it, because you know the history, you know the way it works, and we're prohibited from doing that now without calling a meeting. And I can envision us wanting to talk to people with not only have the same opinion as us, but also those that have differing opinions, one-on-one. I also believe it would be a help for Rob to be able to sit down with two of us at a time and discuss things and hear the feedback from maybe the two different perspectives. So I think from a governance standpoint, I think it's a wise choice. I also believe that getting the county better represented on this port would be a big deal. I think having the Linden region and the East County region represented on the port, as it stands now, Michael and I can probably throw a rock and hit each other's house because we're in Bellingham. So I want to see what the voters say. I know that it's our job to put it on the ballot, but I really do think that we can make our best argument between now and whenever the special election is, and then let the community decide, well, the pros and the cons of that, and whether or not it's worth the expense. So in my mind, it's worthy of a ballot measure, if for nothing else, just to hear what the community has to say about it. End of sentence, period.
Oh, that's your whole pitch? Okay.
That's
I
it.
thought you wanted more than that.
It's not even a pitch.
So, well, first and foremost, I think it's always up to the voters. 2015, when I ran, I was asked this question several times, and I had a different answer then than I do now. As a sitting commissioner, for the last 3.5 years, I've had time to reflect upon whether I think 3 or 5 is better. I think some of the reasons that Ken spoke to were good, but, I don't know that more government's always better. And I've always thought that when something isn't broken, why are we fixing it? Just to make people understand what the port does better, I don't think we need 2 commissioners to do that. I think the people need to get involved. The representation was spoke to for the county, better representation. I don't think 5 districts better represents the county. I think a good commission represents the county, and the voters need to put good people sitting up here. It's difficult enough to make decisions sometimes with 3 people, let alone 5 people. And I'm not saying that I don't want to learn things from other people, but we're plenty approachable if people want to get things done to talk to us. I don't think 2 other people up here is going to make us any more approachable.
Speak for yourself.
I am speaking for myself. I feel phone calls all the time. And since when I ran for office in 2015, I made the statement again, and I'll make it then, and I will make it again now. I think we have a lot of talent in this county. I think there's a lot of ideas out there, and I've always asked people to bring those ideas forward, talk to us. I think we will lose, I honestly believe we will lose transparency as a commission if we go to 5 commissioners, and I will explain how I think that. Let's say I wanted to talk to Michael, and I want to get something done, so I can take Michael, because now I can take and talk to Michael, and I can push an idea through with him, and I can go talk to another commissioner later and push my idea on him. And I can go talk to another commissioner and push my idea on him and work that. And all of this is done in an office or a coffee shop or at home. It's not done right here. Now everything we talk about with ideas and what we're going to do and what the public wants us to do is done right here in front of YouTube and in front of the public. With 5 commissioners, in my mind, that's going to go away. Things are going to be decided before the people hear us talk about it. Things are going to be decided off of camera and out from in front of the public, and I have an issue with that. I'm pretty big on transparency. I think it should all be out in the open, and I don't think that, my personal opinion is, if you go to 5 commissioners, I think you will lose that. Because a long time ago, they called it the good old boys system. Things were done by 2 commissioners, possibly when it wasn't supposed to be of a 3-person commission. They were done behind closed doors, and the transparency wasn't there. And that's when people were upset the first time, and they wanted to go to 5 people. So I think if the people are smart and they elect 3 good commissioners, you're going to have a good commission. And if the people are not very smart and don't elect 3 good commissioners, you're going to have a bad commission, or you can have 5 bad commissioners. I mean, it's how the people elect and who they vote for and who they put forward. That's my opinion. That doesn't mean it can't be changed. Now, there's pros and cons to both of it, both sides of it. For 3 is 5. I spoke to some of the commissioners in Anacortes, and they're unhappy with 5. One lady in particular. So I don't know that it works any better than 5 does as far as representation to the county. The only time there's a choice to be made when the whole county doesn't make the choice is in a primary. If you have 3 people running in one district, you have to eliminate one. So the only time that is done in that district only is then. The rest of the time, like this election tonight, everybody votes all over the county for their commissioners. And these 3 commissioners represent everybody in the county, not just their district. We're not bound to representing our district only. And this is a nonpartisan office, and we're supposed to represent everybody in the county. So I don't understand how making 5 districts is going to represent more people. So, but that's my pitch on it. And once again, I'll go back to the fact that if the people, in my opinion, if the people want this on the ballot, they need to get a petition up. And I've signed many petitions in my lifetime to get things done. If they want to get this done, I feel the people need to put the petition to us, and then we'll do that. That's where I stand on it.
So Commissioners, a couple to-dos for staff, and we'll come back to you November 19th, if that's okay, to get those answers on those couple of questions that came up.
I have one now, I'll tell you. I've gone before commissioners.
Your terms, you're talking about terms.
Your 6-year term, you've already reduced before, you can't go back up to 6 years. Thank you. Anything else, gentlemen? All right, I think we're going to take a break here, and then we'll come back with the 5:30 public comment. Meeting back to order of November 5th, 2019. And we'll start with our 5:30 PM public comment period. Do we have anybody signed up? Is there anybody in the room that would like to speak to something? Please feel free to step forward and state your name and address. And no, I can't get any takers. Okay. Alan, you going to talk? No, I'm good. Okay. Okay, we'll move on to our, we got to I'm going to have to recess the public meeting and open the public hearing on a 2020 preliminary strategic budget. So we'll open the public hearing on a 2020 preliminary strategic budget.
I'm not sure if there's any public comment for the strategic budget.
No, there's not.
No comments? So we will close the public hearing on the 2020 preliminary strategic budget and reconvene the regular commission meeting. And now we will recess the public meeting and open a public hearing on the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. Do we
once
have any
again-
public comment on that?
No.
None? Wow, we're on the edge tonight. We will close the public hearing on the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements and reconvene the regular commission meeting. Action items.
A motion by the Board of Commissioners of the Port of Bellingham to pass Resolution 1387, accepting and adopting the Bellingham International Airport BLI Master Plan approved by the Federal Aviation Administration.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sunil Harman, Director of Aviation. I'm accompanied here today by Emily Philippi, our Airport Operations Manager. She also acted as a project manager for the Airport Master Plan. So today you've got two items that are actually linked, Action Item 1 and Action Item 2. The first one is for your approval and acceptance of the FAA-approved master plan. And then the second one, by resolution, is incorporating that airport master plan as an element of the port's comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. So this presentation actually speaks to both of them. And because it's crafted as a resolution, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to read a prepared statement and then turn it over to Emily for the presentation. So as you see, we received a letter from the FAA approving the airport's master plan early last month. The reason it's before you at the November meeting is because you had your last meeting in North County, and the airport really doesn't impact very many people in North County. So we felt that it's appropriate to hold it here. Development of the master plan followed a very prescribed and systematic process to address operational activity levels, ensure that there's fidelity between our forecasts and the Federal Aviation Administration's forecasts. It addressed safety and security improvements that have arisen since the last master plan was completed. It addressed capacity requirements, environmental impacts, and community compatibility issues as it relates to quality of life issues. We also looked at the projects from a financial responsibility standpoint to ensure that they are feasible, cost feasible, and consistent with local, state, and national goals. The master plan represents the airport's blueprint for the long-term development over a 20-year forecast horizon. It provides a graphic depiction of existing airport facilities and future airport development projects and planned uses of the property. It establishes an activity-based schedule for implementing those projects over time, provides a realistic financial plan to support the capital development program. Through a technically and procedurally validated process, it looked at various development alternatives and identified only those alternatives that made both technical, economic, and environmental sense. The master plan also provided a framework for a continuous planning process. So it's not a static document. It is subject to change as circumstances and markets conditions change over a 20-year horizon. And finally, it provides a plan for the public that adequately addresses all relevant impacts and benefits in accordance with local, state, and federal regulations. So revisiting the demand forecast was the basis for us to proceed with this program, and we did so in conjunction with the airport's technical advisory committee and the community citizens advisory committee. We also had extensive coordination through the website with a comment form where all tasks were posted. The tasks were from the preliminary phase of the draft to the final draft. And then we had, I think, 3 separate presentations as public hearings before the commission. But looking at a forecast over 20 years can be challenging, given that market conditions change rather quickly. Airlines have become much more consolidated. They have retracted to hubs. There's competition from north of the border. The exchange rate continues to be challenging in that the Canadian loonie is not very competitive against a very strong dollar. And finally, we've got security and safety issues that have arisen over time that the FAA wants us to mitigate. And in regards to safety, we also had issues with penetrations to the approach and departure surface because the airport's essentially carved out of a forest. So trees were penetrating the approach surfaces, and this undertook a comprehensive geographic information system survey, and we've identified 124 penetrations that we've mitigated over the last 2 years, many more to go in the less critical surfaces of the airport's operational surfaces. In the course of developing this master plan, the port staff extensively coordinated this effort with Federal Highway and with the State Department of Transportation to arrive at the best solution in addressing the safety deficiency for the runway 16 safety area. That was also an important consideration, but most important of all was it put at ease the general aviation community, which had a great deal of uncertainty in being displaced by the terminal expansion that was proposed in the previous plan. This allowed us to allay those concerns and gave them longevity in the form of long-term leases. So I think generally the tenants that had complained to you for years that they didn't know what was going on now have a clear understanding of how long they can remain in that location. And through the course of this 20-year planning horizon, they were able to negotiate favorable long-term lease terms. And finally, the master plan looked at a number of sustainability projects to reduce our carbon footprint. So we not only did a feasibility study for solar energy to make sure that we can operate the terminal off the grid, but we also looked at opportunities to integrate sustainability projects in the capital projects. LED lighting for the runway when we do runway work, LED lighting for taxiways when we do taxiway work, apron lighting with LEDs, and those sorts of initiatives. We also identified additional charging requirements, charging stations for ground support equipment. Of course, that'll require the cooperation of the airlines. But approval of this plan enables the port now to pursue federal funding for environmental projects. So we have to go through the National Environmental Protection Act to get these projects approved. They're not blanket approved in the letter. And finally, it gives us a path forward to plan for the future. So as we look at the forecast, the preferred forecast was that blue line, which showed a decline in the market as a new entrant came in, serving the same passengers that we do at Everett, Payne Field. We're tracking the green line, which is consistent with, we had anticipated a 5-year downturn. And so this allows us to predict what market conditions will be like going forward. Every year, the FAA issues a new forecast, and as long as we're within 10% up and down within this range of forecasts, we're within their national plan of integrated airports. And with that, I will turn over the presentation to Emily Philippi, who will talk about specific projects, and then we'll close with any questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Sunil. Good morning, or good morning, good evening, Commissioners. Emily Philippi, the Airport Operations Manager. So we have presented several times to you about this master plan, but wanted to highlight specific projects that not only the Commission would see, but also the community can anticipate to see kind of in that 5, 10, 20-year forecast that we have with the master plan. So starting off with the airfield projects, you see a handful on the slide in front of you. A lot of these are for either compliance with FAA standards or for safety. So we have an interior service road and perimeter fencing. Right now, there's no interior road for our firefighters to circle our airport property. That's partly on port roads as well as public roads. So that will be a very increase in safety and security of the airport. We also have realigning of our taxiways. That's a FAA initiative to eliminate unauthorized access onto the runway. So right now we actually have several taxiways that a pilot doesn't have to make one turn to get out onto the runway. It's a straight shot there. So this would align with those FAA regulations at least one 90-degree turn to eliminate that safety risk out on the runway. As well as our shoulders and our blast pads on our runway. Right now, they're gravel. Those are supposed to be paved, as well as we have erosion that's continuing to be an issue on both ends of our runway. You can imagine a fully powered, 319, I would say, that Allegiant operates, has quite a bit of force that erodes some of that landscape that's on there that our firefighters have to continuously improve on. And then we also, last but not least, our runway safety area improvement that you see on there. Again, I think you guys are very well informed of that project. And with the budget, we do have that anticipated for final construction in 2020. Everything that you do see on this slide is eligible for FAA grants at the 90%. So 10% portion will be funded by the port. And these are all pretty much scattered without the next 5-year, if you look at that 2020 strategic budget. If we go to the other side of the house, we refer to as either terminal or landside projects. Our existing terminal, with the forecast that we have, we do not anticipate any additional space. Our, roughly over 100,000 square feet of our terminal will make us whole up to what is forecasted for that 20 years. That being said, we do have potential for future terminal expansion. Say another, anchor airline wanted to come in and needed some additional space, that option would be available to them and comes around to the north side of the airport. As Sunil alluded to, the previous plan had it going south, going into the general aviation. Another project noted on here is also our car rental. It's QTA, quick turnaround facility, and that is really a customer service piece to our passengers, as well as, there's a lot of individuals that come to the airport just to rent cars. So that'll be a facility that they can fuel, wash the vehicles, and then return them back to service for a higher quality of customer service. And today, we are currently collecting a customer facility charge, $2.50 per transaction day for those to help pay for the design as well as construction for that. Sunil also addressed their sustainability. So in 2017, that's when we had our solar feasibility study. And if you recall that study, a lot of that was putting pretty much like a carport per se, like covered parking in our main parking lot. They had two options within that study, either the port to purchase that solar or have a third company do so. And that report did recommend that the port take upon that cost and have that offset of the terminal. FAA funds for that, unfortunately, in Washington State are not available. And with our kind of 5-year budget, that is past the 2024, but it's at least on our horizon and in our future planning that we have. Some of the other sustainabilities, we do have relocating our fuel farm. Right now, it's currently on Williamson Way, just south of our fire station. So all of those fuel trucks that fuel the commercial jets as well as some of the general aviation have to exit the airport fence line and drive all the way back around. So this would be all within the airport fence line and really cut down on that carbon footprint of those vehicle traffic back and forth. That's also in the plan as well. Our general aviation projects, like Sunil also mentioned prior with that shift to future expansion to the north, it gave our general aviation tenants kind of that long withstanding confidence that they needed that they would not be relocated. So all the hangars that you see here are continuing to remain for that 20-year period. And that has been a really good piece with those negotiations as well, and as we continue to build those relationships with the GA community. A few projects that we're very excited about in our general aviation. So where you see here, so this is the ARF station for familiarity of the location here. And so this would be all of the land that it's currently to the south of that facility. Alpha is currently, we're in agreement with them. This is a little over 8 acres of property that we're looking for general aviation development. There'll be a hangar large enough for a Boeing 737 business jet. So we're very excited about that potential, not only to bring in that general aviation, but also, to diverse kind of our economics that are coming into the airport as well. And while that is the land that you see kind of highlighted here, there's also future land to the south that can also do some additional general aviation that we're looking forward to. One thing that's very nice about Bellingham, a lot of other airports, they don't have a lot of real estate around their runway for development. Thankfully, we do. There are some challenges with that land, but we have noted 2 projects in the master plan. One of them on the west side, this would be the southwest side of the airport, would be a logistics center. We think that that would be a great opportunity to partner with a company to come in and do those logistics, have both the highway access as well as for them to utilize the airport. So that is a placeholder. It would be a demand-driven project, but we're actively marketing that site. And on the other side of the west side, so south or northwest side of the airport, we envision a technology business park, whether that be, a campus of some sort that would have some synergy with the aviation community, or buildings, that would potentially, just house, there's data everywhere that people need to store. So there are, some possibilities with that. But again, we do have that real estate that we're actively marketing to attract additional business to the airport. Some other projects that are really on the sustainable side that Sunil briefly touched on, but replacing all of our airfield lights with LEDs. Currently, as signs go out, we are replacing those kind of one by one, but we have a project overall to upgrade all of those lights. We are a 24/7 airport, so sometimes those lights are on for long periods of time. We also, the solar energy, we already covered with our main parking lot. Expand our e-charging stations. We currently have our 4 positions that are in our main parking lot, but if we see additional demand for those, we do have additional parking lots where that could be an option. Working with our airlines to convert to those electrical, what we refer to as ground service vehicles, so whether that be a tug or the carts that are bringing out the bags to the airlines, instead of diesel fuel, get those over to electric, which we already have been seeing some of that, which we're very happy about. Relocating our fuel farm I also touched on, and also construct a snow removal equipment building. You guys approved a purchase of a little under $800,000 for some new equipment, and we need a place to store that. So right now we kind of have an interim solutions, but that is also on the horizon in the master plan. The master plan also looked at the environmental impacts that all of these projects I'm speaking of could potentially have. So every area that you see in red, Sunil said we're in the middle of a forest. We're also in the middle of a lot of wetlands. So these would be kind of project by project, and the FAA would require us to go into an environmental study of each of those projects to determine the impacts and what we would have to do to offset those. There is this potential site, it would be within general aviation, that it's a rock formation that was noted in an archaeology study, that they are uncertain of the significance. So that report just said that they would have to do some additional research if that is of significance or what we would have to do to mitigate it.
Okay.
Yeah. Also on the environmental side, aircraft noise is always a big topic of conversations at airports. So what you can see is the solid line is the 2016 data and the dotted line is the 2037. So that's that 20-year time frame. So you can see while that does increase, it's very, very slightly with those. And the 65 and the 70 and the 75 that you see there, that is an average of what the FAA recognizes as a day-night average of that sound. So they're saying anything within that 65, they note as being impacted by aircraft noise. So that's why you see those lines designated that way. And of course, the closer you get to the airport, the noisier those contours get. So you can see while there is an increase, it's very, very slight. And if you look at that as in terms of numbers, you see that difference there. So the number of housing with that slight increase of our uptick of our operations, 0 additional houses will be impacted. They also look at noise-sensitive facilities, churches, school, libraries. With that additional increase of what we're forecasting for that 20-year period, there's none of those impacted today, and within that 20-year time frame, we don't anticipate any additional. We do have some acreage that will increase, as you see in those different categories. However, if you look back at that map, again, it's just a very slight, if you add up all that acreage in that very thin line, it adds up to that acreage. So a little impact, but in the scheme of things, pretty minuscule. And the airport layout plan, this is really a graphical representation of all those projects. So the FAA will look at this document as we propose those projects forward, and if they're noted on here, then we can continue with the environmental and design. And that concludes our presentation. We have been working really hard. We started this in 2016. I have since had 2 children, if that puts it into perspective. And Sunil and the rest of the staff, we've been working really hard. So we were very happy to see that the FAA approved the plan. And we do recommend the adoption of the master plan. Thank you.
Commissioner Bell, any questions?
No, this is kind of for Sunil. And I think I've expressed concern before about the expansion to the south. And they're aggressively seeking a new airport to our south. And we know that's going to have some impact on us, just exactly what we don't know. I'm assuming that this takes into account a little bit more loss in carrier or more flights, or is that necessarily true? Do you think we're going to hold what we've got?
This forecast did not take into account an airport besides Payne Field coming into service. So what they're looking for now is a supplemental airport to supplement the capacity that will be required at Payne Field, at combined Payne Field and SeaTac in the 2030 timeframe. And they're supposedly not going in with any preconceived suppositions, but the 6 sites that I've seen are well outside the service area that would be our catchment area. So unless there's some significant mass transit high-speed connection that reduces the travel time in 2025, 2030, I don't view it as necessarily having an impact. Payne Field has had a profound impact. So this forecast looked at 3 to 5%. We're tracking about 8% with Payne Field. But they're subsidizing the fares at levels that are not sustainable. So Payne Field, typical load factors are a little higher than 70%, but even at 110% seating capacity, they're not making money off of those flights. It's very competitive, and particularly the Hawaii market, with Southwest coming into West Coast, and then WestJet and Rouge flying Hawaii. Hawaii's become a bargain. You can buy tickets today based on how high the surf is. So $129 one way to Hawaii is the typical fare over the next 3 months or so. And that's not sustainable. So we don't use that as a major contributor to our projections. We think that both SeaTac, YVR, and Painfield will hit a capacity wall in about 5 to 6 years. And we're sitting there ripe with the opportunity to reap a good growth rate, 1.5%, 2% a year over the next 15 years or so.
So the poison pill would be if for some reason they decided to expand at Payne. That would be the.
If they're successful in getting approval through the environmental review process, it'll still take them 15, 20 years to get any kind of sizable capacity to supplement SeaTac. I mean, to build a new airport takes 20 years. And they're looking at greenfield sites. But you've got an anchor tenant at Painfield, you've got Boeing, and I don't know if Boeing's going to be on board with any significant expansion of Painfield.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shepherd.
So you mentioned to the south, does this take into consideration the development in the north with both YVR and Abbotsford?
It does. We actually looked at about a $9 billion capital expansion at YVR, but the customers we serve are not those international customers. YVR is being expanded to provide international gates for primarily the Pacific Rim markets, and they're not our customers. So we don't really see a significant impact. Abbotsford is sort of a wild card. It's a seasonal but very high cost structure. So they're not competitive with U.S. airports today. But were they to have the Canadian government waive the high percentage of grosses and lease fees that the airports pay in Canada, then that's potentially a problem. But we can't anticipate that. They haven't done it yet. I don't think they will. But executives north of the border are always pushing the government there to waive the percentage of gross, the profit sharing, and the very high lease rates that they pay for airports.
So that $9 billion, that's going to go both into passenger experience improvements at the airport, but also expansion for greater capacity.
Yes, terminal expansion, primarily terminal expansion with some landside improvements, with structural garages and so on. And that was announced in the course of developing the forecast.
Yeah, okay. Just quick, tell us how the utilization of the electric vehicle charging at the airport has been.
It's not been as well utilized as we had thought. We have 4 charging stations. Typically, we try to keep one available for employees. That gets used quite often. There are a few pilots, domicile pilots that have electric vehicles. But the other 3, at any time, you've got 2 available. And it's mostly Canadian customers that are utilizing those. But with fast charge coming online, and there's a new technology that allows you to charge in 2 hours and do it at home at a reasonable cost. I don't know if this is a long-term viable option the Canadian airports are looking at 10% of all their parking spaces going to electrical vehicle charging. But I don't think they've anticipated this rapid charge that's affordable and can be done at home. And there's talk about transitioning some gas pumps to fast charge connections. So it remains to be seen. Our four spaces are not nearly utilized at the level that we would have liked to see. And the reservation fee is not the issue. There just aren't enough electric vehicles that require that.
Okay. So I have a question about this airport they're proposing to build somewhere on the west coast here. How many acres will that take, roughly? Do you know, Sunil, offhand?
Yeah, I looked at the new airport site in Southern California that would have replaced Lindbergh Field. So as a rule of thumb, you look for a place that's at least 5 to 8 square miles because you want to have triple simultaneous approaches, instrument landing approaches. And so you're looking at something in the neighborhood of 15 to 20,000 acres of land at a minimum. and there aren't that many greenfield sites available. So we started looking at reuse of military installations. And, military facilities have been decommissioned through a base realignment process historically. So there's always the opportunity that a major base might get shut down. And that's a potential opportunity. But right now they're saying Joint Base McChord is not an option. Where I worked in South Florida, an air base got blown away with Hurricane Andrew, Homestead Air Force Base, and we looked at reusing it as a supplemental field. The population was up in arms about they wanted a military installation, so it sat mothballed for about 15 years. And then after 9/11 became a reserve base because there was all kinds of intelligence and other activity that was taking place. But military bases are probably the only place where you're going to find a site big enough in an urban area. Otherwise, you've got to go pretty far out. And the challenge is how do you get over the Cascades? So you've got weather conditions, terrain conditions. It adds a tremendous amount of cost and makes the project unfeasible when you go out east of the metropolitan area, Seattle.
Okay. Other than that, I don't have any questions. Thank you. It was very thorough.
A motion by the Board of Commissioners of the Port of Bellingham to pass Resolution 1387, accepting and adopting the Bellingham International Airport BLI Master Plan, approved by the Federal Aviation Administration.
Commissioner Shepard?
Aye.
Commissioner Bell? Yes. Commissioner Briscoe's aye as well. Carries 3-0.
A motion to adopt Resolution Number 1388, incorporating the 2019 Bellingham International Airport Master Plan as an element of the port's comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements.
Commissioner Shepard?
Aye.
Commissioner Bell?
Yes.
Commissioner Briscoe's aye as well. Carries 3-0.
A motion to adopt Resolution Number 1388, incorporating the 2019 Bellingham International Airport Master Plan as an element of the port's comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements.
I think we just did that one.
Yep.
You're on to item number 3.
Oh, I thought I had to read it twice.
No, they're good with one reading sometimes.
Okay.
All right. I'm just talking to hear myself talk.
You're so excited about reading it. That's
I
good.
guess. Okay. You want me to
Please.
read Agenda 3? Okay, sorry. Interlocal agreement with the City of Bellingham for comprehensive coastal hazards modeling by U.S. Geologic Survey.
Good evening, Kurt Baumgarten, Port of Bellingham Environmental Planner. And I just have a few slides for you tonight on this at a pretty high level. I'm not a coastal storm modeler, so please don't get too far into the details with me. So this project is led by USGS, and the modeling that we're looking at in cooperation with the city and the county is been extensively rolled out in California. At a variety of different sizes of communities, north and south of San Francisco and Los Angeles. Kind of the mechanics of it is that the city is leading the project with USGS entering into a collaborative agreement with them. And last night at City Council, they did approve the interlocal with USGS. So we kind of had to time things, their meetings the night before ours here. So at this point, it's a partnership between city, county, port, and city of Blaine. We're looking at, or the city is actually looking at other partners, and so the finances of it are basically for the port that these are not to exceed, so would not exceed $80,000, $40,000 in fiscal 2020 and fiscal 2021. This modeling is substantially different than what you'd see what the state of Washington just rolled out a couple of years ago, which is more of a static model. And some people simplify it by calling it a bathtub model, and that's basically taking into account future sea level rise influence on shorelines based on different carbon inputs and different levels of prediction. And so in this model, you're looking at incorporating the state-of-the-art global climate models, combining that with atmospheric conditions and then other ocean conditions. And so you'd be modeling historical conditions and comparing them to current conditions, and that's how they develop the model, is to get it to harmonize. And so basically, it's a far more robust look at the actual impacts that a community would have based on rising sea levels. So, for example, you may have a king tide with a low barometric pressure, and you may have had a lot of antecedent, a lot of rain happening up in the hills, and so that will create a much different situation than a storm coming in on a lower tide, or just your standard predicted sea level rise effects on infrastructure. So benefits to the port for partnering in this is that this is a regionally significant project. The USGS's intention is to roll this out all the way around Puget Sound. I learned recently King County is on board to do this for their next biennium. The Navy is on board down at Hood Canal and other areas in the South Sound. Locally, we would have a seat at the table for the development of this model as part of this ILA, and so we'd be able to. Well, the project design is already in place. That's how USGS brought it to the community, but we would be able to influence if there's any pilot sites chosen. We'd be able to kind of review it as it's being developed and make sure we're staying in step with the applicability of it for port properties. One really interesting part of this model is that not only does it have the ability to look ahead, there's a real-time component that in the event you can see a storm coming, and you can see if there's the timing to line up with a specific tide with other atmospheric conditions, so that if you wanted to, say, sandbag an area that is known by port staff as vulnerable, you could do that. You could go out, you could observe certain areas to get a better assessment of what that would look like, for future conditions. If you want to, is this someplace we need to focus on for capital improvement? And so that kind of ties into the port's goal of doing a more long-range resilience planning for facilities. And then we get, for future planning, you get this Our Coast, Our Future, which is it's a web-based tool that is now really active in California, and planners can use it to run different scenarios that include storm surge, flooding, and that sort of thing for planning purposes. And then there'd be GIS shape files that we'd be able to use internally. And then this last slide, I just thought I'd throw up there for you just to consider. The one element of this is that I described earlier, they call it coastal squeeze. And in Bellingham, it's not as significant as, say, a town like Mount Vernon, where you'd have a significant amount of water coming out of the hills, and coupled with maybe high tide. But in these photos, you can see, here locally, it does create problems for us that should be addressed in the future. That's what I have for you. Discussion, questions?
Mr. Bell.
So this also envisions that the city of Blaine and partners for a signatory.
Yeah. So the city of Blaine's contribution was a little. I didn't quite get how the city nailed that down with them, but the partners, as I understand it right now, are the county is in $125,000 for the next 2 years. I think 10 this year, and then the remainder 115 next. The city is in committed, and then Blaine to a lesser extent. They're also in conversation.
Already adopted this. So they're all on board.
Yes, the city last night. That I'm actually not certain of. I believe they have made their commitment, but the county passed it, county council passed it in late August.
And the city would go forward even if the city of Blaine decided they wanted to opt out?
Yes. Yes,
They're in.
that's correct.
And they'd be in for whatever portion Blaine would have
Yes,
needed to contribute.
yes.
Commissioner Shepard?
As you mentioned that you don't want to field all the technical questions, will we get an opportunity to grill somebody from USGS with technical questions at a future update?
It's not that I don't want to field them. I can't with any degree of certainty. I did invite both the city and USGS here, and yes, they didn't come tonight, but in the future, moving forward, I would envision some updates and being able to get whatever information to you need.
I'm sure, I mean, this is a multi-year process to implement, and so it'd be nice if we got a progress report in another year or so to see how things are going and to hear about the implementation process.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do check-ins however you want. It's envisioned as a 2-year process at this point.
It's a 2-year process, so, okay.
Maybe there's a particular contact, Commissioner Shepard? Is there a particular?
It's Eric
contact?
Grossman that would be the lead for USGS.
Okay.
Yep.
I know Eric. All right. Well, I like it because I think the maps make the situation real for people. It helps with future planning, and it just really helps us to visualize what is likely to occur. There's a range of these other mapping tools are out and widely circulating. There's another one by a group called Climate Central that is providing some of the same digital sea level elevation mapping, and those maps I haven't seen a single one that shows less water. They all show more water. And I've taken a look at the California ones, and you can do quite a bit of playing with the variables. You can play with variables on terms of how much sea level rise, other factors, and it produces a lot of different results that are dramatic. And in the Climate Central mapping, even with substantial cuts that are represented by the cuts identified in the Paris Accord, which our country has just given notice that we're pulling out of, those sea level rise by 2030, 2050, which really isn't that far away now, are substantial. And they're, for the port, losing almost all of our property along the waterfront in Fairhaven, Blaine, and Bellingham. That's not necessarily that all land is underwater at all times, but those lands become underwater at high tide and flood stage. So I like these because it does provide that kind of real perspective of what's coming, and hopefully provides more impetus for taking substantial measures to address some of the root problems and look at those projects that we put in place for reduction of climate emissions and how we can scale back the impacts that are continuing to occur. I also wonder if we need to start having more reserve funds for these types of erosion events. It seems that our coastlines are going to continue to get assaulted by water. It's going to put ongoing pressure on our bulkheads and all of our other systems, and I think we're going to incur expenses that are going to surprise us in years to come. So how we're going to pay for those and how those are going to impact our budgets is, I think, something that we should start thinking about in terms of some of that long-range planning. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
I'm good, thank you, Kurt.
Interlocal agreement with the City of Bellingham for comprehensive coastal hazard modeling by U.S. Geologic Survey.
Commissioner Bell?
Yes.
Yes.
Briscoe's yes. Carries 3-0.
Motion by the Port Commission to approve a modification of lease between the Port of Bellingham and Sound Pacific Seafood LLC for premises at the Blaine Marina Industrial Area.
Good evening, Commissioners. Brady Scott, Senior Property Manager, Marine Trades. I want to acknowledge Paul Burrell here with Sound Pacific Seafood in the audience. In 2009, the port entered a 20-year lease with the Upper Skagit Indian Tribe for property in the Blaine Marine Industrial Area. The lease contained 5 consecutive 5-year renewal options for a total term up to 45 years or until 2059. In 2014, that lease was assigned to Sound Pacific Seafood through a purchase and sale agreement, and the port approved the consent to sale. The lease is subject to rent adjustments every 5 years, and this modification of lease simply addresses the rent adjustment, and that rent is in accordance with the water-reliant commercial marine rental policy. It also updates the agreement to the current boilerplate contract language. And with that, staff simply recommends approval.
Mr. Shepherd.
No questions.
Commissioner Bell.
Quick comment though, about improvements that we make in long-term leases that we do sign. Somebody monetizes those somewhere along the way. Mr. Burrell, congratulations on monetizing this. But I do think it is important to make sure that we are good stewards of the port's money. And I think we discussed with Shirley at some level, that's why we want tenants to pay for improvements as much as we possibly can. So that you're not monetizing port dollars, right? That being said, I'm in favor of this. I think it's a good move, and I wish you well.
No comments.
Motion by the Port Commission to approve a modification of lease between the Port of Bellingham and Sound Pacific Seafood LLC for premises at the Blaine Marina Industrial Area.
Mr. Shepherd.
Aye. Yes.
Mr. Bell. Mr. Prisco's aye, carries 3-0. Thank you, Brady. That brings us to the other business, or the monkey business, whichever it may be. You look like you're ready, Commissioner
have
Bell.
none.
No, really?
The only business I have is right through that door.
Wow. Commissioner Shepherd.
My only one is I just have to give another shout out to everyone who's worked on getting that pump track. It's been so fun to see the use there. And sorry I missed the port pump track day on Monday, but I had already been there 3 days in a row. I was sharing with people that, my kids woke up on Saturday after we were there on Friday and demanded to go back on Saturday. And then I tried to get them to do some other bike ride on Sunday, but no, we were back at the pump track on Sunday. So it's really fun. And when I go there, I see people from my 4-year-old up to, people who I didn't expect to ride it, like my wife got on her bike and she rode the pump track. My 70-year-old father rode the pump track. And we see just all sorts of people, and the area is really active, it's alive, and I really hope that our developers watching how much enthusiasm people are having around that space. I think our interest in seeing that space activated is really coming to fruition.
And how much business they're losing by not being there, right?
People look over at that building and are thirsty. They're hungry.
So at one point, there were 3 generations of shepherds on the pump track. I think that might be a record. I doubt anyone's had 4 generations on there yet. But I went by them on Friday. I went out there during my lunch hour and was riding the track. I was like, oh, I know you. The track was crowded. I think school was out on Friday, so at least they weren't skipping school. But
Yeah. Well, I just congratulate everybody. I know I've seen lots of port employees out there with shovels, lots of port employees out there with rakes, wheeling dirt around, and making that a reality. So it's not something that comes without ongoing maintenance, and that's the case for every structure we have. And this one is particularly in the elements without any cover or protection. And so we will continue putting more drainage. We will continue utilizing volunteers to keep this facility up and running. But it's really been quite well received.
I thought that was a push for covering.
No.
I've had lots of suggestions for how to cover it. Everything from, building a formal structure over the whole thing to protect it. Yeah, that wouldn't be cheap.
No. That's it for me.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. Our agricultural sector in East County, we really don't have any representation here at the port. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that we get direct input or direct contact with.
Well, from time to time, we've met with farm friends out there. There's the Farm for Life group that we did the Berry Lab with and helped fund that space, but nothing on a reoccurring, consistent basis.
So I would like my fellow commissioners to consider and think about how we could maybe put somebody on staff or somebody that keeps us connected all the time with the agricultural industry, so we know what's going on. So and we can get input to how we can better help the agricultural community in Whatcom County. So maybe at next meeting, if we have some other ideas, other business, we could discuss it further.
I think it's a great program for our economic development team, so I'll work with them to figure out how we better connect with that group and come back to you with some suggestions.
I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but if you go to a 5-commissioner district, you've got a couple of districts that involve ag land, and you wouldn't have to hire anybody at all. You could actually have them sitting at the table with you.
Well, I was kind of looking for somebody that's got their hands right in there and they're all dirty, not somebody that's just kind of from out there.
Oh, kind of like a fisherman on the port
Yeah,
that
there you go.
actually, that actually gets his hands dirty.
Yeah.
So you
I
might
clean
get
my hands
you
with
might get a farmer who.
No, I just think that we need to be more involved directly. And I think there's a lot of things that the port can probably do to assist that part of our county. The other thing, our smaller buildings we have, I seen that Tesla's got these solar roof tiles now. And I was going to ask Adrian, but she left, I think. If that is in the circle of consideration of things when we're doing smaller, because they apparently replaced from what I've been reading, they replaced the roof.
Yeah, so anytime we're looking at roof space these days for repair or replacement, we're looking at solar options and how to make that roof be able to hold them. Unfortunately, a lot of our roofs can't take that additional weight today. But when we're looking at doing these repairs, we're looking at upgrading them and what it takes, and we'll be bringing more of those to you in the future.
Then I met with Rob and I think Brady and Greg on the situation in Blaine with Starfish's building kind of falling in the bay, and I want to make sure that my fellow commissioners were kind of up to speed on that there. And I'm not sure where, I spoke with Greg for a few minutes today, I'm not sure where we're at on getting that something going on that, but we need to do something there.
Greg Nichols, Senior Engineer. I apologize, I didn't have all the information when you stopped by. It caught me a little flat-footed there. Where we're at on that is that in talking with our engineering team that's been working on that bulkhead and internally, the major concern there is the building itself. And so the engineering department did put together a rough order of magnitude cost estimate in order to demolish that building, and we provided that information to real estate. And real estate has initiated conversations with the tenant to discuss how we move forward with the removal of that structure. Because like I said, the major concern is the building and the pier that supports it rather than the bulkhead that's underneath it.
Right.
So that's kind of where we're at. And so we're waiting for that meeting between real estate and the tenant to come to an agreement as to how we're going to deal with that.
And as far as their lease goes, the terms of the lease, they're required to pay for that or do it themselves, correct? We'll either
I would
amortize
defer
it-
to real estate on that one.
We'll either amortize it over the term of the lease, or they'll pay for it. Is that a fair assumption?
Shirley McPherson, Real Estate Director. And the tenant in this case is required to pay that cost. But I will tell you, they asked us to look into the potential of covering that and then amortizing the cost over the term of their lease. So that's the discussion that needs to occur. And we'll get back to the commission on that.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Greg.
Sure.
So I got a letter about I'm just curious if my fellow commissioners were contacted about a third lane from exit 250 going north on the freeway?
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys are in the loop on that? Okay, I'm just curious. I don't know if, and just for Rob's information, they're starting a kind of you want to call it a planning commission or a committee to look at how to do this, and I'm assuming we probably want to be involved at some level.
Which
on
one's
that.
250? Anyone know?
Yeah, it's the Squalicum Parkway, or not Squalicum, but Fairhaven Parkway.
Fairhaven Parkway. Okay.
Going north.
Gotcha.
And I didn't catch how far they were going to go, but.
To Grandview.
To Grandview? Okay, so are you involved in some of that, Don?
Senator Erickson brought it up at the Small Cities meeting.
Okay.
So, yeah, we will definitely get involved in that conversation.
Okay, I don't know that I want to, we were
Yeah.
asked, I think, individually if we want to be involved, and I don't know if I want to be involved quite in that, but if.
Yeah, we'll find a staff person. I'm not sure who the appropriate person will be, but we'll find someone to follow this one very closely. So we're talking about expanding I-5 from Fairhaven Parkway all the way up to Grandview.
Yeah, with 3 lanes, or adding 1 lane to make it 3 lanes. And I don't know if the gist of this is they're going to have it go one direction like they do an express lane through the times of the day, or was that ever brought up or anything discussed at all, Don?
Don Goldberg, Director of Economic Development. No, the senator just brought up that I guess he had brought this measure up once before earlier, and that he was now going to start pursuing it again. He just said 1 lane each direction. It would be multiple billions of dollars, and that he was going to start this process again.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that, because that enlightened us a little bit more.
Yeah, my reaction was, do we have a clear need for this? That's a lot of money for a third lane, and is the rationale there? I would much rather be on a high-speed rail system than seeing a third lane myself, but both those initiatives have big price tags.
You know, Sunil's in the room.
We'll get more information for you on this, and we'll reach out to Senator Erickson and find out where it stands and how far along it is. It sounds like it's in really initial stages of it. Yeah.
And it's a long shot.
I didn't know if everybody was
Bringing
aware
up
of that.
though. Appreciate it.
So, I think that covers it. Anything else?
I wish you well tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, meeting adjourned.